Single dad's fired moment exposed. You won't believe the incredible twist in his life after 7 days. Jake leaned back in the unforgiving hospital chair, staring at the termination letter like it was a foreign object. The crisp paper crinkled under the weight of disappointment. One bad decision after another had led to this moment. His heart sank as he thought of his 2 children at home, oblivious to the catastrophe that was unfolding. How could I have worked so hard only to end up here? He muttered under his breath. The American dream felt like a cruel joke, and right now, it seemed impossible to wake up from it. Navigating the job market as a single dad honed his instincts, but now, everything felt like a sinking ship. The whispers of the community, once a supportive hum, morphed into a cacophony of judgmental gazes. "Look at that guy," they said without saying. "A nurse with no job." Jake felt the weight of it all, squeezing his throat. Even at the grocery store, reaching for a box of cereal felt like an open admission of his failure. The bills accrued at an alarming rate, each month straining his already thin resources. Each late notice came with a new layer of shame. As Jake wrestled with despair, he met Dr. Walter at an old diner, where the aroma of burnt coffee mingled with bittersweet memories. Initially just an escape from his reality, their conversations soon turned insightful. Walter spoke of resilience, a word Jake had begun to despise because it felt unattainable. "Have you ever thought about mentoring?" Walter asked one day, watching as Jake struggled to accept his circumstances. "Teaching the next generation could reframe your purpose." Jake found his insides churning. Could he really inspire others when he felt so deeply lost? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. In an impulse driven by desperation, Jake agreed to volunteer as a tutor for young healthcare students in the community. To his surprise, he discovered that teaching came naturally. Mentoring teens ignited something dormant inside him. Maybe he could nurture talents instead of merely accepting the roles that life had thrown at him. Pulses of hope sparked in his chest, urging him to step outside the ghost of his departed career. Yet with every encouraging word he'd utter, a morose undertone tangled within his thoughts. What if this doesn't work? What if he stumbles again? As weeks passed, Jake faced an undeniable paradox. He was thriving in this new role but crumbling under the shadow of his estranged father. Memories of their last bitter conversation replayed in his mind, a rigid man who scoffed at any choice that deviated from his expectations. Could he face that ghost? Despite the increasing community support, he felt hollow, afraid to chip at the facade he had built. His father's disapproval loomed like a storm cloud, ready to rain on any hopeful progress he made. Just when the exhilaration of the mentoring experience began to overshadow his insecurities, Jake was invited to present at a healthcare forum. His innovative teaching methods had caught the eye of a prominent organization excited for new voices. Standing backstage on the day of the forum, anxiety enveloped him like a vice. What if they laughed at him? What if every vulnerability he'd exposed became fodder for ridicule? Just then, he caught a glimpse of his father in the audience, the embodiment of his fears, and for the first time in a long while, Jake felt the burden of both hope and anguish collide violently within him. Would he step into the light, or retreat forevermore into shadows of self-doubt? Jake's breath quickened as he stepped to the podium, the dim stage lights hot on his skin. The murmurs of the audience were like a distant tide washing over him, both calming and tumultuous. He took a moment to gather himself, the weight of expectation plunging into his chest. With his father's critical gaze boring into him, he felt the faint flicker of doubt reignite. But there was also a small flame of determination alongside it, reminding him why he stood there in the first place. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice steady although his insides trembled. "Today, I want to talk about resilience and the power of mentorship." He could feel the tremors of his own story vibrating within each word. There was a heavy irony in addressing resilience when he felt like he was just keeping his head above water. Was he really a voice of inspiration? But he pressed onward, committed to pulling others along as he had just begun to do for himself. He wove tales of his experiences in nursing, the challenges he'd faced, and how, despite his recent setbacks, he had rediscovered a purpose through teaching. The audience leaned in, captivated by the raw honesty in his narrative. He spoke about his students' kids with aspirations, many of whom had already faced adversities far greater than his own. Those of them who didn't realize their potential resonated with him especially. He too had felt lost, searching for direction. As he continued, he caught glimpses of nodding heads, smiles of recognition, and even tears. They were finding solace in his struggle. This response stoked the flickering flame in his chest. He was not merely sharing words, he was sharing life experience, but as he rounded the corner of his story and approached a pinnacle of emotion, a cold sweat prickled his forehead. This was not just about affirming his newfound role. It was about confronting the specter of his past, of a man whose approval he sought yet repulsed him in equal measure. What would his father think of this new chapter? Would he deem it another one of Jake's failures, a whim destined to end in disappointment? The older man's presence became an anchor, pulling at the edges of his conviction. Finishing his presentation amidst applause, Jake stepped back from the podium. The exhilaration of having spoken his truth washed over him like a wave, temporarily distracting him from the gnawing discomfort of his father's expectations. Yet that comfort vanished as he turned from the stage, his pulse quickening once more. As he made his way through the crowd, he felt buoyed by genuine praise but guarded against lurking shadows. The eyes that sparked admiration and connection also reflected disbelief, judgments that he had no control over. Maybe teaching had tapped into hidden strengths, but the nagging question remained, was he truly meant for this path? Could he sustain this newfound authenticity in front of the very man who had shaped so many of his fears? Jake's thoughts spiraled as he approached his father, who had remained seated, steadfast and scrutinizing. The moment felt electric, like standing on the edge of a cliff with no clear view of the bottom. He realized then that this confrontation would not define him but rather ignite a new quest. If he could face his father, perhaps he could cement this burgeoning role with conviction. "Dad, I want to show you something," he said, surprising even himself with clarity in his voice. He hadn't just shared his fears with a room full of strangers, he had challenged himself to confront the source of his doubts. What he didn't anticipate was how his father would respond. The tension in the air felt imminent. Was Jake prepared for the truth? The moment of reckoning was poised to strike when suddenly, the fabric of their strained relationship hung in the balance, and Jake could only wait to see if it would unravel or mend. The air was thick with an electric silence as Jake awaited his father's response. His heart raced, drumming a frantic tempo against his ribcage as if his body sensed the critical juncture of this moment. Eyes closed, he briefly envisioned an alternate reality where he didn't have to confront his father at all, where he remained hidden in the shadows of expectation, too afraid to step into the light. But that was no longer who he wanted to be. "Show me what?" His father's voice was almost disinterested, but Jake sensed an underlying current of scrutiny. This was a man who had spent a lifetime bolstering Jake's ideas into their ideal forms while tearing down those that didn't measure up. "What I'm doing teaching," Jake replied, the passion in his voice surprising him. "It matters. It has an impact." He stepped closer, fueled by a desperate need for validation that moved him more than the fear of rejection. "I want to help kids see their worth." Jake's father's brow furrowed, the skepticism washing over his features like a flood. "And you think sharing your failures will somehow validate your role as a mentor?" The question landed heavily, igniting hot coals of frustration in Jake's gut. "No, Dad," he shot back, adrenaline quickening his speech. "It's not about my failures, it's about using them to teach resilience. People can learn and grow no matter their past." A long silence stretched between them, each second feeling like an eternity. Jake's resolve wavered under the pressure of his father's critical eye, but he fought back the urge to retreat. He thought about the students he'd inspired and how far they'd come. If he could guide them, surely he could stand firm against his father's scrutiny. "Jake, you expect to make a difference just by telling stories?" You think that's enough? His father leaned forward slightly, intensity filling the space. In that moment, Jake felt as if the weight of an entire lifetime rested on his shoulders. This confrontation was more than just words. It encapsulated every struggle, fear, and hope he had harbored for as long as he could remember. I'm learning and growing. That's what I want to show you, Jake faltered for a moment, the crack in his voice betraying the vulnerability beneath his boldness. I want you to see that I'm becoming someone who matters. I'm not just a disappointment. The flicker of surprise in his father's eyes gave Jake a momentary spark of hope. Perhaps this was the openness he feared to show. Perhaps his determination could turn the tide. Are you asking for my support? His father's gaze softened slightly, as if casting off the mantle of expectation he had worn for so long. Jake wasn't certain if he had ever heard those words weighted with support. Yes, I am. I need to know that you believe in me, that you see me trying. Split-tongued by years of disapproval, Jake waited in the suspended air. The irony of the moment, standing amidst a crowd of admirers yet still seeking validation from the one who should be his greatest ally, bit at him. What kind of man was he seeking approval from a person whose belief in him had always been halting? Well, his father began hesitantly, people can change. As the sentence hung in the air, Jake felt the full force of their relationship pulsating raw, unrefined, and achingly hopeful. Perhaps this was the turning point. The revelation clawing its way to the surface felt monumental, yet it carried a weight he had never anticipated. As they stood amidst a gathering of faces, Jake realized he was standing not just before his father but also before the crucible of self-identity. He was not merely seeking acceptance, he was forging it through confrontation. Let's talk more, his father finally conceded, each word measured, perhaps brimming with the potential of what lay beyond their fraught histories. But as Jake prepared to explore this fragile thread of connection, a new thought loomed ominously in his mind. Was he ready to dismantle the barriers of his past to build a bridge forward? What would he find in that uncertain space between acceptance and failure? Before he could answer, a figure in the audience caught his eye, someone who had been listening intently yet now seemed to signal a growing concern. Curiosity and dread swirled within Jake. What had he missed in the reckoning of his own familial confrontation? The next chapter loomed with uncertainty, driving him to question if the truth of his transformation would truly be accepted or if it would only spark even deeper conflicts. Jake pulled his focus back to the assembly, heart still racing from the confrontation. The figure in the audience, an old colleague, Mark, looked troubled, his brow furrowed in a way that suggested something significant had shifted in the atmosphere. Uncertainty pricked at Jake's courage. Had his father's presence overshadowed his progress? Or perhaps, even worse, had Jake inadvertently exposed a weakness they could exploit? Each beat of his heart echoed the weight of his father's words. Change was possible, but Jake wondered if he truly understood how precarious that change could be. What if the truth he desperately wanted to uphold was met with skepticism or, worse, indifference? Jake! Mark called, pushing through the crowd as he approached. We need to talk. Flashes of doubt ignited inside him as he remembered their past collaborations, full of shared ideas and creative inspiration. But now, his voice filled with hesitance mirrored the concern on Mark's face. It was all wrong. Jake had assumed the event would only be about his triumphs, but even the best moments were clouded by shadows. What's wrong? Jake asked, almost dreading the answer. He felt a knot twisting in his stomach, forcing him to shift his weight from one foot to the other. I heard some things back there, Mark began cautiously, scanning the faces around them. People are questioning your methods, your approach. They think it's risky. Risky? The term felt like a slap, a stark reminder that he was still standing on the edge, teetering between acceptance and rebuke. You mean my teaching style? Or? Jake probed, desperate for clarity amidst the fog of uncertainty. Look, Mark said, lowering his voice. I value your passion, but not everyone sees it that way. They think you're exposing your failures instead of leveraging your successes. Urgency clasped at Jake's chest, constricting his breath. Had he spent so much time searching for validation that he had unwittingly painted a target on his back? The thought of losing the respect he had painstakingly garnered left him uneasy. But isn't vulnerability a strength? Doesn't it show our humanity? Maybe, but perception is everything. Mark folded his arms, his tone both supportive and cautionary. You didn't just share stories, you laid your heart out. And while that may resonate with some, others crave a narrative of unyielding strength. They want hope wrapped in certainty. Jake felt an icy grip around his heart, the sharp contradiction of wanting to lead with authenticity while understanding the thirst for a more fortified facade. It stirred a complex feeling within him, a clingy blend of rebellious determination and gut-wrenching self-doubt. Who was he really trying to prove himself to? I will be who I am, he declared with a newfound fierceness, the flames of earlier confrontation sparking life through his resolve. But I need to demonstrate that I can teach through my experiences without compromising my integrity. Then you have to double down, Jake, Mark urged, meeting his gaze directly. Show them not just the failures but how you rose from them. Strength isn't just about hiding the past, it's about owning it to inspire others. The pieces began to settle into place as excitement cascaded through his thoughts. This wasn't just a conversation, it was a lifeline, a calling to interweave authenticity with resilience. Can you help me? Jake found himself asking, instinctively reaching for the support he once took for granted. This moment wasn't just a wake-up call, it was a manifestation of what he had been wrestling with internally. Absolutely, Mark replied, his features softening as determination flickered in his eyes. But be prepared, it'll require a deeper look into your motivations and your methods. We need to shape a message that highlights your journey, not just your struggles. With every word exchanged, a new path unfurled before Jake, one grounded in the reality of his experience, yet vibrant with the promise of transformation. But as he contemplated the scope of this new direction, another thought crept in, draping a familiar cloak of dread across his shoulders. Was it possible to bear himself completely without the risk of being misunderstood again? The confrontation with his father had unraveled one strand of his past, yet, the threads of perception tangled around him more tightly than ever. Would he be able to craft a narrative where vulnerability served as a beacon rather than a liability? Determined to find out, Jake squared his shoulders, ready to tackle this challenge head-on. Yet, as he prepared to step back into the spotlight, uncertainty loomed. What would the next pulse of truth reveal about him? Would it fortify his purpose or break him down even further? Jake felt the weight of the world settle uneasily on his shoulders as he left the assembly hall with Mark beside him. Each step out felt heavy, laden with expectations and the unvoiced judgments he sensed lurking behind sympathetic smiles. As they emerged into the afternoon light, he exhaled, trying to push away the enveloping weight of doubt. What do you think is the first step? Jake asked, glancing at Mark with tentative hope. Their earlier conversation had ignited a flicker of determination within him, but the flame was small and vulnerable. He needed guidance, a plan to harness his vulnerabilities into a strengths-based narrative. You need to reflect first, Mark replied, pausing as he leaned against a nearby railing. Get clear on what your message is. What do you want people to take away from your experiences? Jake's mind raced, a flurry of moments encapsulating his journey swirling like leaves in a sudden gust. For so long, his narrative was one of struggle and survival, a story highlighting battles lost and the lingering effects of family expectations. But now, could he redefine it as one of fortitude and growth? Maybe I need to gather stories, lessons I've learned, Jake mused aloud, though uncertainty still pricked his enthusiasm. Experiences that highlight my resilience but without diminishing the authority or impact of those lessons. Exactly, Mark encouraged, straightening up. Your experiences are valid, but it's how you frame them that will resonate. You must elevate your failures into teachings you want to impart, not just a recounting of mistakes. Jake absorbed his colleague's words, recognizing the challenge ahead. He often viewed his setbacks with embarrassment, but perhaps it was time to rise above that perception. Could he present himself not as someone seeking validation, but as a guide willing to share paths he navigated? The subtle desire to reshape his narrative ignited something inside him. I could hold workshops or maybe even write a piece that integrates those lessons into applicable strategies, Jake proposed, excitement edging his voice upward. An approach that highlights not just what went wrong, but what I learned about leadership and perseverance. Now you're talking, Mark replied, a faint smile lifting the corners of his mouth. That's a powerful angle. Remember, sharing insights without shame can be empowering both for you and for your audience. If you own those stories, they become part of your authority instead of your weakness. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows, Jake felt a sense of responsibility carving out space in his heart. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about cultivating an environment for others to grow from his journey. Can we schedule some time to work on this together? Jake asked, feeling more competent, more aligned with his purpose. Of course, Mark said with enthusiasm. But be prepared to dig deep. You'll confront not just the stories you've told, but the ones that frightened you, the truths that still hold power over you. The thought sent a ripple of anxiety through Jake. He had avoided certain memories, boxed them away under layers of shame and fear. To face them now felt daunting, but Mark's confidence ignited a challenge he couldn't shy away from. As they began brainstorming practical applications, Jake started visualizing workshops, audience engagement, and the words that would flow from his newfound perspective. Each idea propelled him closer to a future where he wielded his past not as a weight but as a willingness to lead. But with every ambition surfaced, another shadow lurked, a whisper reminding him of his father. This journey was not just professional, the specter of familial judgment shadowed his aspirations. Could he truly separate those toxic influences from the narrative he wanted to construct? With every plan they forged, apprehension entwined with his passion, a constant reminder that this endeavor would stir old wounds. Yet, the momentum was undeniable, he was ready to drape himself in authenticity. Let's sketch out your story framework tomorrow, Mark suggested, slapping Jake on the back before walking away. You're on the cusp of something big, but only if you're ready to embrace it. Jake nodded, feeling something shift within. The confrontation with his father lingered, but perhaps it was time to confront that struggle head-on, establish his worth on his own terms. As he turned to head back into his reality, a question loomed larger than any he'd faced before. What revelations would he unearth amidst those scars? What power lay hidden within his story, waiting for him to claim it? Jake woke early the next morning, the glow of dawn barely breaking through his curtains. There it was again, an unsettling mix of excitement and anxiety tangled in his chest. Today was not just another day, it was the beginning of something he was determined to mold into a stepping stone for his future. He brewed himself a strong cup of coffee, hands slightly trembling with anticipation. The conversation with Mark had enough weight to tip the balance between his thoughts and actions. He settled at his dining table, laptop open, fingers poised over the keyboard, ready to transform uncertainty into clarity. Jake began crafting an outline, his mind racing with the structure of his narrative. He contemplated how best to present his trials, threading themes of resilience through the personal stories he had painstakingly tucked away over the years. This can be a true reflection of growth, he repeated to himself like a mantra, yet, with each part of his outline, lingering doubts crept in. What if he exposed too much? Would revisiting old pain further entrap him in his past? The echo of his father's derision played in his mind, a haunting reminder of those words that had pierced him long ago. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to dive into unknown waters. He was jolted back to reality by his son, Ethan, bounding into the room, full of unfiltered energy. The 10-year-old's laughter cut through the fog of Jake's overthinking, reminding him why he was even embarking on this journey of self-exploration. He wanted Ethan to see the power in vulnerability, to embrace the ability to transform obstacles into lessons learned. "Dad, what are you working on?" Ethan asked brightly, his curiosity peeking over the edge of the table. Jake paused, taking a moment to gauge how to respond. "Just something important. A way to share stories that can help others." Ethan's eyes sparkled. "Like superhero stories? Where they fight the bad guys?" Jake chuckled. "Sort of. More like stories about how to be brave when things get tough. Cool. Can I help? The boy asked, climbing onto a chair. Their eyes met, and at that moment, Jake felt a rush of warmth spreading through him. He could turn his struggles into strength not only for himself but for his son too. He sighed, feeling stronger than before. Yes. You can help me think of some strong ideas. The small act of including Ethan felt refreshing. Less pressure would bloat the looming task ahead. Together, they brainstormed, Ethan excitedly sharing ideas while Jake took notes. What were some of the challenges they encountered together? How did they overcome obstacles as a family? In this collaboration, Jake began to recognize the poignant lessons intertwined in their everyday experiences. As the morning grew older, Jake felt an unexpected realization wash over him. Not all stories were rooted in turmoil. He could celebrate triumphs, too. Small victories, like Ethan helping him cook or the time they built a fort together, were equally vital to his narrative. Energized by this shared connection, Jake began to type. The words flowed more freely than he imagined, each sentence unraveling another thread of fear. He contemplated the prospects of speaking directly about his family history, the impact it had on shaping his identity. Could these moments create an authentic message, one that redefined his relationship with his past? However, as he delved deeper, an inescapable tension nagged at him. The notion of confronting his father's influence loomed. Would he be able to portray that without reliving the paralyzing fear that once consumed him? He glanced outside, watching the leaves dance at the whims of the wind, a reminder that change was possible, even amidst uncertainty. Could the act of revealing his truth to others emit a healing energy he hadn't anticipated? The clock ticked loudly in the background, bringing him back to reality. He couldn't spend another minute second-guessing himself. A burst of resolve filled him as he continued typing. With Ethan beside him, he was no longer alone in this endeavor, and perhaps that in itself was a shift worth celebrating, but just as he hit an inspiring note, a sudden ping jolted him from his flow. An email had arrived, a notification from a familiar name. It was his father, reaching out to reconnect after months of silence. Jake's heart raced. The call to face his fears had arrived much sooner than he anticipated. The past stirred within him, bringing doubt and determination into a tight embrace. Could he confront the voice of critique again without dissolving into the three-part cycle of shame and silence? As the screen glowed back at him, Jake knew this was it. He had a choice to make. Would he respond and parry that familiar criticism with clarity, or would he retreat? The story was only beginning, and the path ahead held consequences he was no longer sure he was ready to face. But for Ethan, for himself, it was time to dive deeper into the truth, even if it meant treading into the turbulent waters of his past. Jake sat in silence, the cursor blinking at him like a heartbeat, each pulse reminding him of the open email from his father. It was a message shrouded in uncertainty, just as he himself felt. Would this interaction serve as a source of conflict that could derail his progress, or would it yield the clarity he desperately sought? A war raged within. With Ethan still buzzing around the table, Jake took a deep breath and clicked open the email. The message was brief, filled with familiar phrases that had always felt like magnifying glasses exposing weaknesses and doubts. I hope you're doing well. I thought we could catch up. It's been too long. His finger hovered over the keyboard. Each word felt heavy, like a long-forgotten burden he had to reconcile. This was not merely a social call, this was an invitation to revisit old wounds. Jake found himself questioning whether to reply directly. Should he suppress the emotions swirling within or confront them head-on? The mental wrestling intensified. What's that from Grandpa? Ethan's curious voice broke through Jake's haze. Before he could muster a response, he found himself wondering how often he had shielded Ethan from the reality of his past. Was this interaction with his father a chance for growth, or a potential for repeating a cycle of defensiveness? It's nothing, buddy, Jake lied instinctively, regretting it immediately. He refocused, trying to gather himself enough to articulate what he wanted. His thoughts gravitated toward modeling resilience for Ethan. If he would respond, wouldn't it be a crucial teaching moment? Yet, Jake couldn't help but notice how profoundly he desired to maintain the peace he had fought for within himself. The juxtaposition of his son's innocence against the backdrop of his strained familial dynamics felt overwhelming. How do I teach you about courage when I'm terrified myself? He pondered, the thought rattling against his resolve. After an agonizing moment, he decided to respond, but with a twist. From then on, his communication would reflect not just a reaction to his father's words, but a conscious declaration of who he had become. Jake started typing, carefully structuring sentences that conveyed growth rather than shame. In that measured choice, he felt a small surge of empowerment, realizing he could set boundaries while still engaging. Ethan watched, a semblance of concern in his eyes. "Dad? Just writing back to Grandpa. Are you okay?" The boy leaned forward, the sincerity in his gaze disarming. Jake nodded slowly, appreciating the emotional support Ethan unwittingly provided. "I am. I promise. It's a bit complicated." With each stroke of the keys, revelations about his past emerged. He wrote candidly about the things that had haunted him, about the fear that had stopped him in his tracks far too often. And then, as if a dam had broken, he detailed his own evolution, how he was choosing to be stronger for himself and for Ethan. Once he hit send, relief washed over him, but it was quickly tempered by anxiety. He didn't know how his father would respond or if this would lead to further confrontation. Regardless, vulnerability hung in the air like incense after a ritual, unfamiliar yet oddly liberating. Within moments of shutting the laptop, Ethan gave him a tight hug, pulling him from his thoughts. "You did it, Dad. You sent it." Jake felt a swell of pride, mixed with the uncertainty still knotted in his chest. "Yeah, I did," he managed, though he could already feel fresh waves of anxiety lapping away at his newfound strength. "Can we go build a fort now?" Ethan asked excitedly, seamlessly shifting the atmosphere. Jake smiled, letting the remnants of his tension abate in the innocence of his son's request. Building the fort felt symbolic. It was a way to create something sturdy amidst all that felt shaky. As they gathered pillows and blankets, each item felt like a shield against potential fallout. The laughter between them was a soothing balm, yet Jake remained aware of the crucial decision made earlier. But as the fort took shape, his phone vibrated. Violently, startling him. A notification. His heart raced again as he hesitated before checking it. The changing tides of fate were relentless. Jake pulled out the device, his thumb hovering over the screen. The notification was from his father, and he felt the world around him compress in anticipation. Did he dare dive into the waves now raging at the shore of his emotions? "Dad?" Ethan's voice pulled him back, curiosity lighting up his face. "Let us finish up here first," Jake replied, but inside, he was teetering between exhilaration and dread. The moment of truth was closing in, and he was both terrified and exhilarated at what lay ahead. As they secured the final blanket atop their makeshift fort, Jake's phone vibrated again, insistent and demanding. He could feel the life they'd created in that small space flicker around him as he considered the implications of what could be waiting in that digital message. Ethan's joyful chatter faded into a murmur. Jake's world narrowed down to that singular action: tap the screen and see what awaited him. Part of him felt exhilarated at this test of courage, while another part braced for the storm that could unleash turmoil he'd tried so hard to manage. "Can you grab me that pillow, buddy?" he asked, redirecting Ethan's attention as his fingers trembled on the phone. The familiar weight of expectation loomed in the air, and Jake had the distinct feeling that, regardless of the content, he was already different for even contemplating a response. The second stretched as he finally swiped to read the message. "I got your email, Jake. I appreciate your honesty. Can we discuss this soon? I've had some time to reflect." Jake's shoulders relaxed momentarily, swelling with cautious hope. Was this truly a glimmer of introspection from his father? His instinct suggested otherwise. Caution was his faithful companion, and he questioned if this was merely the calm before the inevitable storm. "Dad, are you okay?" Ethan asked again, a slight frown creasing his forehead at the change in Jake's demeanor. Jake forced a smile, the edge of anxiety still dancing in his veins. "Yeah, just thinking." The lie felt weighty, but it served its purpose, shielding Ethan from the tumult brewing inside. "Good. Because I really want to make the fort taller," Ethan declared, his innocent enthusiasm a balm against Jake's growing unease. Together they restructured the fort, layering cushions and blankets more artistically as they engaged in light-hearted banter. Each laugh Ethan emitted felt like a reminder of what mattered most. And still, through that joy, Jake's thoughts ping-ponged back and forth, a conversation looming just out of reach. This opportunity to confront his past felt both empowering and terrifying. He had told Ethan that they must face fears, yet here he was, caught in the haunting limbo of wishing for acceptance and fearing judgment. A perplexing dichotomy brewed. How could he preach courage while resting on the edge of indecision? Suddenly, one of the blankets slipped, threatening the stability of their fort. Jake caught it just in time, the act serving as an unsettling metaphor. Was he maintaining this facade of solidity, or was it too fragile, teetering on the brink of collapse? "Dad, look!" Ethan exclaimed, climbing over the cushions to reach a vantage point inside the fort. "It looks great up here." In that moment, Jake understood. Within the confines of this child-made sanctuary, he had to choose clarity over confusion. This fort, like his new path, could either crumble under unaddressed fears or stand strong with transparency and courage. "Ethan," he began, his heart thudding as he realized the pivotal moment they were at, "how do you feel when you face something scary?" "Like I can be brave." The boy's response was instant, certain, and Jake recognized that he had been modeling, inadvertently teaching resilience every moment, even when he didn't feel strong himself. "Right. Being brave isn't about being unafraid, it's about knowing fear exists and still moving forward," he replied, each word more for himself than his son. He was weary of allowing fear to dictate his decisions. It had been a crutch for too long. The glimmer of hesitation from the phone buzzed again, and he smiled to conceal his growing resolve. He realized he had the power to reframe his narrative, to confront the message with an unveiled spirit, beginning a dialogue with his father instead of repeating dysfunction. As they snuggled inside the fort, Jake understood that this was a pivotal moment, not merely a practical decision about an email, but a crucial juncture in their lives. The emotional landscape ahead was daunting yet vital. "Dad, can we stay in here forever?" Ethan asked, peering up at him with puppy-dog eyes. The intensity of that gaze grounded Jake. The future wasn't just about him anymore. "Let us see where this takes us." "Together," Jake answered, feeling lighter than he had in ages. It was a promise of connection, a chance to build something stronger than he'd ever known. The phone buzzed for a third time, and in that moment of anticipation, Jake felt a growing determination. He wasn't just a son seeking approval, he was a father embodying the strength he wished to pass down. He took a deep breath, ready to rise to the occasion as the moment of truth approached. What would the conversation with his father reveal about the past and, more importantly, about the man he was becoming? The moment Jake officially decided to face his father resonated through the fabric of the fort, its structure a fragile reflection of his own resolve. As Ethan squirmed beside him, joy radiating from every giggle, Jake was drawn deeper into introspection. This was just a blanket fort, yet it encapsulated the safety he craved and the vulnerability he feared to expose. Once the laughter subsided, Jake's eyes snapped back to his phone. The tactile, glowing screen held the promise of something monumental, a chance at vulnerability amid the fortress of his past. There was no denying it, he had to respond. As seconds ticked away, he confronted the knot of emotions that churned within him. What would he say? What would emerge from this dialogue with the man whose approval had eluded him for so long? "Dad, do you think you can help me with something?" Ethan's innocent query pulled him from the depths of contemplation. "Sure, buddy. What do you need?" Jake managed to respond, forcing the weight of his internal struggle into the background. "I want to build a slide for our fort. Can we use that big box over there?" Ethan pointed enthusiastically towards a cardboard box resting against the wall, oblivious to the tumult threading through his father's mind. Of course. Jake replied, feeling a surge of purpose. As they set about creating this fort addition, he noted how each piece fit together, just like the steps he needed to take. Everything required precision, every bolt needed intention. Perhaps this was a warm-up for what was next in that moment of creativity. Jake's heart softened. The chaotic noise in his mind began to mute as he focused on the present task, helping Ethan construct something imaginative. Building was an act of empowerment, both creative and transformative. This was an opportunity to not just teach and guide his son, but also to start pivoting his direction toward a healthier place emotionally, but the feelings of anxiety still loomed. What if this conversation with his father unraveled into more anger, more disappointment? Doubts clawed at him, trying to undermine his newfound resolve. Jake allowed himself a fleeting thought: what if his father had truly reflected? What if this conversation was the axis upon which both of their lives could pivot? The notion ignited a flicker of hope that could not be extinguished. It was time to drop the facade, to unearth the narrative that had shaped their relationship for years. He glanced at Ethan, now engrossed in the process of sliding the cardboard into place. The open essence of childhood joy made Jake question what had gone wrong. Was it fear, misunderstanding, or the weight of past failures? As they finished crafting the slide, Jake knew he had to summon his strength. He had to approach this interaction with clarity, to seek not validation but understanding. This was not just about him, it was also about teaching Ethan the importance of confronting fears. In a whisper, he reflected, they don't always have to go the way we think they will. That thought solidified Jake's determination. He needed to extend grace, both to himself and his father, as they navigated old conflicts. Okay, Ethan, let us test the slide. He announced with exaggerated enthusiasm, hoping to mask the turmoil that still gripped his heart. As they took turns gliding down, laughter echoed through the fort, creating a cocoon of warmth and spontaneity. Just as he leaned back against the fort, the phone buzzed once more. Jake's heart raced. This was not just a text, it felt like a signal, a cue from the universe. He took in the sight of Ethan, blissfully ignorant yet a beacon of inspiration, and he realized this tether to joy and innocence could spur his courage. With a deep breath, he reached for the phone, ready to plunge into whatever awaited him. The headline of the chapter of his life was converging toward an inevitable climax. What lay beyond that glowing screen was still shrouded in uncertainty, but the act of reaching out was already a powerful step toward his transformation. Little did he know, this conversation would unfold patterns far beyond his understanding, revealing hidden truths that could alter his future profoundly. As he readied himself to type, a simple question lingered in his mind: was he prepared to confront the person he had once feared to be? With the fort standing tall, fortified by shared laughter and creativity, Jake felt a shift solidifying within him. The phone buzzed again, pulling him back into the gravity of his situation. He opened up a dialogue with his father. This moment held the potential to redefine not just their relationship, but also his path forward. Taking a breath and grasping the handle of this moment, Jake opened the conversation with vulnerability, for himself and for Ethan. Hey Dad, I appreciate your response. Can we set a time to talk? I've been doing a lot of thinking. Each word felt like a brick gradually building the bridge he had been longing to cross. He thought back to Marquez's counsel about owning his story, to use his experience to not only fortify himself but also to illuminate the path for others. He wanted something different this time with his father. He was no longer the submerged boy seeking approval, he was a man seeking understanding. As Jake hit send, he turned to Ethan, who was setting a makeshift table inside their fort. You know, buddy, sometimes talking about our feelings is kind of like building this fort, he said, reaching for another blanket to drape across the top. The more we communicate, the stronger we make our walls. Ethan looked up from his task, his eyes bright with curiosity. Like when I told you I was scared of the dark, and we added more lights. Exactly. Jake grinned, his heart swelling with pride. His son had grasped the concept, and it reinforced Jake's resolve. This journey was bigger than him, it was about nurturing this kind of insight in Ethan, so that he never felt trapped in silence. Jake reflected on the small yet profound shifts taking place. The fear he once let dictate him was being replaced by an active engagement with his truth. Whether through mentoring students or addressing his father, he was in the process of reshaping his narrative, a narrative that didn't shy away from failures but instead transformed them into lessons of persistence and strength. As the day unfolded, he immersed himself in the fort building, and also in wrestling with the upcoming conversation with his father. It felt surreal. He was embarking on a venture not just to seek acceptance but to define his identity through the lens of experience rather than fear. The crux of his metamorphosis lay in confronting those shadows he had long suppressed. Later that evening, as Jake settled down with Ethan for bedtime, a message from his father arrived. It flashed across the screen, electric with possibility. "I'd like us to talk tomorrow at the diner like old times. I want to understand more about what you've been doing." A wave of relief washed over him. Perhaps this wasn't just an olive branch but an acknowledgement of Jake's evolution. The stage was set, he was ready to confront the implications of shared history and resilience. He chose to compose a reply that opened the door for dialogue, rather than closing it with defensiveness. "Sounds good, Dad. I look forward to it. I have a lot I want to share about my journey." As he turned off his phone, Jake felt a smile surface, the warmth of hope mingling with the nervous flutter in his belly. Stepping beyond his comfort zone had become the catalyst for his transformation. The next day at the diner, surrounded by the familiar ambience of clattering silverware and soft chatter, Jake felt an upsurge of confidence. He awaited his father's arrival, reflecting on how he had conquered both fear and doubt, focusing on the lessons that grounded him in resilience. He remembered the students he mentored, their stories melded together with his own struggles, all woven into the fabric of strength. When his father entered, the older man's demeanor wavered between sternness and curiosity. Yet, there was a hint of softness beneath the surface. Jake reminded himself that this moment was not just an encounter, it was an opportunity to redefine their relationship. Jake began with sincerity. "Dad, I've been on a journey of understanding my past and working towards being someone I can be proud of. I want you to see my growth." As Jake laid bare his truths to his father, recounting his experiences and the lessons learned along the way, he reveled in a profound realization: ownership of his narrative transformed uncertainty into empowerment. Each acknowledgement of vulnerability became a building block toward deeper understanding and, ultimately, mending their relationship. With each shared sentiment, the walls Jake had once built to shield himself from judgment began to collapse under the weight of emotional honesty. The conversations flowed, and he began to sense a shift within his father, a newfound respect blooming amidst the complexities of their histories. That diner, as he communicated his belief in resilience, purpose, and nurture, Jake realized something monumental. He was not merely seeking approval any longer, but clarifying his path in a manner that fused acceptance and authenticity into a single narrative. Even as the lunch crowd ebbed and flowed around them, the transformation etched itself markedly in the space between words and understanding. As the meeting concluded, Jake left the diner, his heart full of an exhilarating blend of hope and relief. His father's hand on his shoulder signified acceptance that had long been in coming, symbolizing a new chapter none had expected. Jake stepped into the approaching dusk, invigorated by newfound clarity. He had not only grown but had also shaped relationships, paving the way for a future united by the lessons of resilience rather than shackled by the weight of past failures. And in that moment, with his heart alight and resolute, Jake knew that he had not only conquered his personal battles but had solidified a legacy of empowerment for his children. With his own transformation defined by authenticity, he stepped confidently forward, ready to meet whatever lay ahead. Now is your moment to take action. You need to subscribe now to our channel to ensure you don't miss out on these exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and help us reach more people like Jake. Comment below with your reactions and theories about this incredible conclusion. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to hear this powerful message. Your support means everything. Let us uplift each other through these inspiring journeys.